Well, hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Jim Ferguson, and I've got a very distinguished guest with me again for the second time, Godfrey Bloom. Nice to see you, Godfrey. How are you? You're looking well.
I'm very good. I've just been to your part of the world. I've been up to Tobermory via Oban, and the weather every single day. It was my fifth tour of Scotland, fifth tour of the Highlands. The sun shone every day. So I don't know what all this business about rain in Scotland is. I never get any.
Well, that's because the sun shines on the righteous. Isn't that right, Godfrey? I mean, or maybe it's the devil looking after his own. I'm not very sure, but I'm delighted to have you back on the channel. You are an author. You're a journalist. You are a fund manager, a former member of the European Parliament, and you're a former British Army officer. In fact, you were a major with the 4th Armoured Brigade. So, I mean, you've had a very, very interesting career, Godfrey, and it's a great pleasure to have you back on here with the channel because the last time was incredibly popular. A lot of people loved having you on because you call it like it is. You call a spade a spade. And I'm delighted that you were up in Scotland, my home turf. Tobermory, as we were saying just before we started recording, Tobermory is actually one of my favourite whiskies. I'm not a huge whiskey drinker, but actually I like a drop of Tobermory now and again if I'm going to have a dram. And it's not the most expensive of the whiskies right there, but I think it's a bit of a blend, but actually it is a pleasant enough whiskey. Have you actually tried Tobermory whiskey before, Godfrey?
Yes, I did have one or two in the bar of the Tobermory Hotel. I do like a glass of whiskey, but now it's a funny thing. I like cheapo whiskey. You know, funnily enough, people used to very kindly buy me very posh whiskies, very peaty. But when it comes to alcohol, my wife is the same. We are quantity people rather than quality.
Okay, you need to try a Glenfiddich. It's not so peaty. Glenfiddich is actually a very pale whiskey, and it's actually a very good whiskey. So next time you're in the Highlands, you must look out for the Glenfiddich. It's a good malt, you know, good single malt. Anyway, let's get down to things. Now, I wanted to start because I noticed a very interesting tweet that you'd pinned to your channel, and it caught my attention. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because you were talking about the fact that it might be difficult to get your money out of the banks. What's going on with that, Godfrey?
Well, I run a website which actually part of which, not all of which, is financially based, as it were. So I get a lot of feedback. And quite a lot of feedback. One on banks, because I have been saying since I was in the Parliament, and one of my speeches, which got, I don't know, it got millions of views, saying that all the banks are broke because of the fractional reserve banking system. All banks are insolvent. That's just there's an opinion. It's a matter of fact. And I used to do this for a living. You know, I was a fund manager in fixed interest and stuff for a living for many, many years for pension funds. So it's a field I know. Now, one of the feedbacks I got was somebody wanted to buy a reasonably expensive second-hand car, and it took nearly a week to get the bank to release his money, which was on deposit. It wasn't on special deposit. It was there to be spent and transferred. That took a week. I tried to book a cottage personally in August for a holiday. It took a week for them to transfer the money, and only when I drilled down to find out that it wasn't transferred as per my instruction, I said, why? And they said, oh, it's security. I said, if it'd been security, you should have contacted me. You didn't. It wasn't a great deal of money. My wife sold a horse box for about £25,000, and the guy was stalled by his bank for well over a week, and he eventually had to stand by the horse box and take a photo of him stand by the horse box for security. And the biggest and the nastiest, and I'd like your viewers to haul this one in because this is very sinister. I have a gold page talking about gold and so on and so forth. It's very popular. And one of my subscribers wanted to put £200,000 worth of gold. He wanted to buy 200,000, but take it out of Lloyd's Bank and buy gold on transfer. Perfectly legitimate, absolutely above board, no reason to suspect anything else. They would not transfer. They still have not transferred. They will not. They have refused. And when he said, just a minute, it's my money, why won't you transfer it? And they're now making noises about, if you get difficult about this, we can actually file it as possibly a security risk, or there's a potential crime situation or drugs. This guy is, this is to stop him taking his own money out of the bank. And I'm getting feedback like this. And if any of your subscribers, let's say they've got £5,000 in deposit, go along and see if you can get it out. And you'll find the manager will turn up. He'll come from his office. They will want a very long conversation with you about what you're going to do with the money and why you want it. NatWest, Lloyds Bank.
I mean, I've heard this. I've heard things like this, but not to the extent of what you've just described. Now, can I just ask you, because there are different ways of investing in gold? Not that I'm an expert, but I mean, was this buying gold bars that are held in a special deposit, or was he buying gold or gold coins to effectively have himself? I mean, what kind of gold bullion are we talking about? Is it bullion bars to be stored?
He was buying gold sovereigns from a very reputable dealer where I invest myself, and part of my pension is from the Ministry of Justice, and they're very comfortable with me holding gold in my pension in secure situation with this company. So there is no issue here at all. He wanted to buy coins. He wanted to take delivery, and he just wanted to, he wanted his money out of banks because he knows banks are going down. Banks are insolvent. They're going down now once a month in America. Credit Suisse has gone down, as you know, over here, and we're waiting for the next shoe to drop. So if you've got money on deposit, the last thing you want where to have it is a bank, but they won't let you have it back without a fight. We're taking this one to the Financial Conduct Authority. That's how serious it is. This is a major bank. This is Lloyds Bank. All right. And people, if you think you've got money in Lloyds Bank and it's as safe as houses and all the rest of it, don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. They're all as bad as each other.
Do you think that Lloyds Bank might be on the brink of collapse?
They are all on the brink of collapse. And of course, if you remember 2007, Northern Rock was the first one to go down.
Yeah.
And then they went down like a house of cards. NatWest is 30% owned by the taxpayer, which actually then gives you CEOs, we noticed from the Nigel Farage system, that you get political appointees in charge. They don't know anything about banking. They're political appointees owning 30% of NatWest. Lloyds is the same.
NatWest. Am I right in saying that was former Royal Bank of Scotland? Is that right? Is that NatWest?
They all amalgamated, and they amalgamated again. I'm not quite sure what the trail is, but they also, for example, Lloyds own Halifax. And people think Halifax is still a bit, I've got my money in a building society. You haven't. Halifax is now a bank, Trustee Savings Bank. It's part of the Lloyds empire. So it's all interwoven, and there's nowhere to run.
I know that Royal Bank of Scotland have been involved in criminal, they've had lost criminal cases against them for fraud and all sorts of things. And I mean, the list is extensive. I think that's why they wanted to rebrand and change their name. But I mean, RBS are probably one of the most corrupt banks going. I mean, they've been done for all sorts of things, and really are very much against businesses as well. I mean, they were bankrupting businesses till the government put a stop to it, so that they could go after their assets. Unbelievable.
That's right.
And I forget what the actual the name of the system they were using, but they were bankrupting business. They were putting them onto this ability to invoice financing, pulling the rug at the last minute, collapsing the companies in order to target their assets. Unbelievable.
It's scandalous. It's scandalous. And if you think back, nobody knows better than you, Jim. If you went back 50 years, the Royal Bank of Scotland would be possibly one of the most prestigious banks in the world. But now,
I mean, at one time, a bit like the BBC used to be one of the best sources of news. Not anymore.
That's just a platform for political propaganda, largely by the government of the day, who funds them.
What would you say to people that might be banking with these types of banks at the moment? I mean, would you give them any sort of general advice? I mean, I know you can't necessarily give financial advice per se, but what would you say to people that might be hearing this and saying, well, wait a minute, I don't like the sound of that?
If I were, you must have enough money in the bank to meet your bills, because that's how life is. You know, you have to have enough money to meet your bills. If you've got any more than that, my suggestion is to take it out, because people will say, but there's a financial deposit guarantee. Now, here's the rub. Yes, but the situation now is so much bigger than 2007, 2008. And incidentally, there have been no changes in regulation since then. This could all happen again, and everything's very much bigger. So the government can't bail everybody out unless they print money to do so, which means by nature it will be degraded. So when the banks go down, it will be completely degraded. So if you think you've got £80,000 worth of insurance per bank at the moment, that's the regulation. It's going to take ages to get it back. There'll be all sorts of reasons you can't have it. And by the time you do get it, it will be very severely degraded. Your money is safer under your mattress than in a bank at the moment. And on my clip, if my producer's done it, and he should have done, he usually does, there's a little clip that you can get on to find out. Don't just believe me. Don't just believe me. You can drill down and you can find out exactly what bank reserves are in the UK and America and Europe. You can find out. So, for example, if you have £10,000 worth in your bank deposit account, they only have reserves to the tune of about £1,000 or £1,500, and that goes for everybody. It doesn't matter what number it is. Basel III is the main regulation here. Basel III is the main regulation, the Bank of International Settlements. They're supposed to keep 10% in reserves, and they don't even keep that. That's what the problem is with fractional reserve banking. And of course, they are failing, and they're failing in America because the bank reserves were in American T-bills, which were thought to be actually rock solid. But when you put interest rates up on a bond, it doesn't matter whether it's a gilt or it's a United States T-bond, your capital value falls. That's how they work. I used to do this for a living. So if interest rates go as they have done from 2 to 5 in the United States, your underwriting bond will fall by around about 20%. That's what's happened, and that's where the big Californian bank last year went down. That was the reason. Another bank in Pennsylvania went down last week. It's happening all the time. But of course, banks are interlinked. They all lend each other money under LIBOR and things like that. So you may think, even if you think your bank's in fairly good shape, which it isn't, believe me, it isn't. But even if you think it can be hauled down by other things on a knock-on effect. Put it under the bloody mattress, but don't leave it in the bank. And if you don't believe me, if anybody doesn't believe me, go along, if you have £5,000 on deposit, and try and take it out without a conversation where you have to justify it. And this goes back to the old Banking Charter Act in the 1845, I think. As long as goes that. So when you give your bank money, it becomes the property of the bank. They give you an account with a promissory note on it. That's how banking works. And Henry Ford said in 1926, if people knew how banks worked, nobody would put their money in a bank. They're going down.
What would happen? I mean, I hear you. And by the way, we're going to put a link up to your website, which I would encourage people to go to, because there's some great information on there. A couple of things. First of all, rather than keeping it under the mattress, would it be better to buy things like gold sovereigns? Because, I mean, gold is going up in value, which is often an indication that things are not good in the fiat currency world. I mean, is that something that they could do?
I have my reserves. I have made such money as I have made, which isn't, I have to say, a great deal. Being a boozer, I've spent much of it. I made money on equities in the 90s. And if you couldn't score in the 90s in equities, you know, you were a real chump. And when it got to 2000, when I saw Gordon Brown selling gold at £250 an ounce, I then went in, and I've been buying gold sovereigns. Gold sovereigns are coin of the realm, as you know. There's no capital gains tax. There's no VAT. They're coin of the realm. So consequently, if you buy those, and I bought those, I was buying gold therefore at 250 £260 an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
It's now about just under £1,900 an ounce, which is gives you a return roundabout of 8% a year since I started doing it. It's the way to go. That's what the central banks are doing. Who's buying gold at the moment? The central banks. Be your own central bank. Be your own central bank. And of course, as you know...
Sorry, Godfrey, on you go.
I was just about to say, when I'm lecturing at universities, ones I'm not banned from, I used to have a gold sovereign. It happened to be dated 1905. 1905. Now, you could buy bed breakfast at a good hotel in London, Berlin, Paris, or New York with that gold coin. They're £400 on today, a gold sovereign. You can still do that today. It's a protection of wealth. It's not an investment. It's not it's money. It's a protection of wealth. It's not an investment. So if you have a Bucksheaf 5 or 10, or in the case of my subscriber yesterday, and we're still working on this, it was $200,000. It's quite a significant sum, and he knows. If you've got that kind of money, you know how many beans make 5. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that kind of money. And of course, most of us live from paycheck to paycheck in lives of quiet desperation. If you're an ordinary, honest working person outside the public sector, who of course are totally and utterly protected from all this kind of thing, I would certainly buy some gold sovereigns. And they're very, very easy to buy. And I've got a website which is not for profit. We can tell you, gives you a list of about 3 or 4 people who I trust, where my gold is, and my wife's gold is, and my co-directors of a company I work for are.
Godfrey, you'll know. I mean, we followed each other for a long time. You know that I started a freedom movement called Freedom Trade International. Not that long. Well, I launched it not that long ago. I've been working on it for about 15 months. And that's all to do with things like, how to prepare for what's coming. And I mean, we're big on freedom of speech. We're big on freedom of movement, but we are also a resistance movement to all of these things that's coming. And this is of particular interest to me. So I'll put a link up to this particular interview in that, because I think a lot of people will be very interested to hear what you're talking about. But let me ask you a question. What would happen if there was something like a large influx of the population, perhaps globally, not just nationally, that all decided to demand their money at the same time? What would happen, do you think?
Well, all the banks would go down. We have 2 problems here. We have banks which are insolvent, and we also have a crisis in fiat currency. And this comes about by money printing. And this is something that the Americans are falling foul of. They're printing money that they don't have. They are overspending. They've just granted another £62 billion to the Ukraine, when that war sadly is lost. I'm sorry, it's just lost. That's bad money going after good. So that is a problem. Then they're sponsoring the Israeli problem. That's more money going. And so consequently, the only way they can fund that is to either borrow or tax. Well, they can't tax anymore. People just can't afford to pay any more tax. It's the same here, same in Western Europe. So they have this terrible problem. So all they can do is print money, which degrades it. So just getting back as gold as a benchmark, which is real money, gold is real money. When Nixon came off the gold standard in 1971, he took the gold, that was called the closing the gold window. Nixon did it to pay for Vietnam. All money printing is to fight war. And you can go back to the Middle Ages, is to fight wars. So they print the money. Now, the dollar against gold has lost its purchasing power by 95%. 95% since 1970, 71. So you can see, and I did an interview with an American the other day, Zhang, her name is Mrs. Zhang, which she's a well-known guru in the United States. She said, well, what can you buy for $1? What can you buy for £1? Well, when I started my boozing career in 1968, a pint of bitter was an old shilling, which I think is about 5p today or 6p today, which means after a game of rugby, I could swamp my 10 pints back. Now, in Tobermory, blame you, and the Tobermory Hotel, it was £6 a pint.
Yeah.
And it's £7 in London. So money is just simply degraded. And there's another thing that old geezers like me know. If you're a middle-class old geezer like me, a baby boomer, your mother didn't work. Middle-class wives didn't work. They didn't need to work. They brought up the family, 2 or 3 kids. That's what they did. And the man paid the mortgage and brought home the bacon, as it were. No middle-class family today, young middle-class family, could exist unless the wife worked. You know, you wouldn't be able to afford the mortgage. You wouldn't afford the lifestyle and the new car. The wife has to work. That's a consequence of inflation, which is a tax on the ordinary citizen, which is quite disgraceful and quite deliberate. But if you're in the public sector, your salaries and your pensions are index linked. You can't buy that outside. So your parliamentarians, your civil servants, your people working at the town hall are outside this loop. It doesn't concern them. And this is the problem. We are divided, and people think it's all the wrong reasons. We're not divided on color. We're not divided on age. We're divided on whether you work for the public sector or the private sector. And that's the division.
And I think you raise a very, very important point about this whole thing about division. I mean, we see it all the time. Black against white, young against old, gay against straight, male against female. It's like there is a controlling mind that wants everybody to be divided against each other along some particular line or for some particular reason. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts as to what that controlling mind was, because we're seeing this in the financial realms as well. We're seeing laws in Australia where they've just passed laws for digital ID. And I've been saying for a long time, I know you have as well, that digital ID is one of the first battlegrounds to come, because that will then move on to central bank digital currencies, 15-minute smart cities. These things are all about controlling us, aren't they? And I think we're witnessing the death of cash as we've known it as well, aren't we, Godfrey?
They hate cash, and they hate us buying gold because it takes money out of the system. You see, if you buy gold, you've taken your money off the table. You're out of the casino. This is why they hate gold. And they hate cash for the same reason. It gives you freedom of movement. They can't track it. They can't trace it. And with digital central banking currencies, I mean, the Bank of England said that they won't program it. They're not using it to find out what you spent your money on and where you've been, which means, of course, as we know now, they are. Because every public figure, every single public figure, politicians, presenters on mainstream TV, as soon as they open their mouth, you know they're lying. They are unbelievable liars. And I've called them out on my channel many, many times, and I've not been sued yet. And I say, sue me, go on, have a crack. I'd love to meet you in court, and I'll explain to a jury why you all are a crook. So this is one of the, but divide and rule, of course, I have to say, I'm a bit of a pro-empire man. I thought it was a force in the main for good. It had its flaws, but divide and conquer. I mean, we ran most of the world in the empire by making sure that was our man there, and we had another man to balance that over there, and the Indian subcontinent and Africa and all the rest of it. We looked after that chief, but you know, and so yeah, divide and rule. It's as old as time itself, and of course people say, oh, and of course it's all monitored by the World Economic Forum, as we know, and people say, well, you know, if it's a conspiracy theory, it's not. Get onto the WEF website. They're quite honest about what they want.
They are, and that's the thing about them. You know, they're saying what they're going to do. They're going to do away with elections. They're going to control every aspect of people's lives. And I think in a horrifying way, I think in particular, when you listen to Yuval Harari, the sidekick of Klaus Schwab, he's a real anti-human type person. He is, I think he genuinely hates humanity. And he wants to change humanity into some form of transhumanist type agenda where they're constantly talking about the fact that, you know, they can put chips into people, they can program people. I mean, he's talked about human beings being hackable. That's his own words, not mine. And I think it's a very serious, grave error to discount these kind of people as just being on the lunatic fringe. The problem with people like Klaus Schwab is he's very much on the main fringe, and he has successfully, especially with those around him, he has in fact penetrated, as in his own words, the cabinets of the world. For whatever reason, a lot of people have gone along with it. I think, you know, you and I have both been in business for a long time. You sometimes join a business group or a club because you want to maybe do more business, or you want to meet somebody that you might do business with. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the World Economic Forum, there was another agenda behind a lot of it. The lower tier WEF members are probably not aware of it, or if they are, they probably don't believe it. But those at the top levels know exactly what they're doing. And there is a new empire rising. In fact, I think it's already there. It's called the New World Order. They've been talking about it for a long time. And what we're seeing, and I'm very keen to get your impression about this and your opinion. But this vast amount of mass illegal immigration that we're witnessing, I believe, is a way to completely destroy national sovereign states from within and to weaken strong ideological nations that are proud of their national identity, because the globalists see that as a barrier to them having their one world order. And they're using, in my opinion, mass illegal immigration in a very, very effective way in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany, Australia, New Zealand, America, the UK, obviously, Canada, wherever you see WEF devotees that have infiltrated those senior positions of government, you see mass illegal immigration going on. I mean, am I on the right lines, or am I completely off the charts with this one, Godfrey?
No, you're exactly right. And of course, they confirm it, and they confirm it. The WF confirm it. They don't want national borders, and they want to destroy cultures. They want to do all these kind of things. So that there's a big mix of culture here. So the people they bring in aren't Catholics from Eastern Europe or something to this country. They're people who have a completely and totally alien culture. So that helps degrade it. Ireland is going through this process badly at the moment, and Germany and France and Italy, and we've got to look at who is WEF stages. Look at the people who have been on a WEF platform on a number of occasions, and it's an interesting list. Let's go from top down. King Charles III, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the current Prince of Wales, the leader of the opposition, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and who sponsors things when it comes down to the second tier, so they can withdraw licenses from doctors who speak out about mass medication or compulsory medication, like Dr. Cartland, for example. The GMC, the General Medical Council, is funded in part by the WEF. So wakey, wakey, everybody you see at the top of the tree, but they're not hiding it. This is why I get cross when people say it's a conspiracy theory. Just Google it. It's all there. Don't take my word for it. Just type in WF and have a look at these people. These people, and that guy you mentioned, what was his name? The number two to Schwab, Happy Pappy.
Noble Yuval Harari, yeah.
Yeah, well, him. Well, you've only got to look at him. Excuse me being a bit bloody vulgar. Have a look at him. His problem is he's never got laid. That's his problem. And he thinks if he can do it this way, if he can somehow change the world, he might be able to bloody get an artificial intelligence girlfriend. That's his problem. Have a look at him.
I suspect he swings in different ways. But anyway,
he can't get laid by anybody.
Well, it's rumored that Klaus and him have been very, very closely aligned at some point. So
God, who knows?
Who knows? Oh, yeah. But I mean, in a serious way, we are witnessing massive changes coming to our world and our planet. And you often hear certain phrases being used, like "for the sake of the planet," "for the common good," lowering carbon, net zero carbon emissions. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's from Alabama in the United States there quite recently, and we were talking back and forth about the language that's often used, which was similar to what was used during World War II with the Nazis when they talked about the final solution. And the interrogators that were questioning these Nazis were quite flummoxed when they came out and said, well, we did it because it was to do with the final solution. They didn't know what this was. But this was a coded language that they all use. So when they talk about, when the World Economic Forum talks about net zero, reducing carbon, they're actually talking, in my opinion, about reducing us. We are the carbon they want to reduce. And when you talked about the attacks on doctors that spoke out during the pandemic, you're absolutely right. And let's not forget that the head of Ofcom here in the UK is another member of the World Economic Forum. So their deep penetration has been very successful. The New World Order is already here. But what do we do about it? I mean, can people fight back? I believe they can, Jeffrey. I think that's why I'm encouraging people to join freedom movements like Freedom to International, but also, more than that, we're telling people, get ready, because they're trying to control the farmland. Bill Gates is buying up huge acreage in the United States. He's now one of the biggest landowners over there. But at the same time, they're trying to put 3,000 to 5,000 farmers in Holland out of business, and they're doing the same in other countries as well. Do you think they're trying to corner the food supply, Godfrey?
Well, certainly the Duke of Edinburgh, obviously the current king's father, are both Malthusians. They both believe in massive reductions in the global population. So that's up front. You know, there's never been a doubt about it. It's not a conspiracy theory again. It's on record and very easily looked up. And of course, I looked at, I read the other day, I say the other day, it was about 6 months ago, a biography of Joseph Goebbels, and master evil genius when it comes to propaganda. And he had some basic points on propaganda. First of all, there has to be a simple emotive message. You can't change anybody's mind with facts or graphs or anything or data. It doesn't work for most of the population. You can't change their mind. It has to be emotion. You appeal to the emotion of people. And on top of that, there must be no dissent. Dissent is verboten. You must not allow dissent. So you can't have dissent about climate change on mainstream media, because people will go to the pub and say, hey, did you see that bloke last night? He seemed to know his business. He says it's all a load of nonsense, and so on and so forth. No dissent. So it has to be one simple message based on emotion with no dissent. And that's exactly what we're getting now. And what did van der Linden, or whatever bloody name is, come away from Davos saying? She said, our main problem here, we must deal with misinformation. But what the word she was really meant was dissent. So, and of course, the other thing I did over the winter, so what a sad individual I am, Jim, I did a Smithsonian course on psychology because I couldn't understand why people behave in the way they do.
Right.
And it came out, it doesn't matter which population it is, it doesn't matter whether it's British or American, but 80% of the population will always go with the flow. They will always go with the flow. And most people in this country get their information from the BBC, and they're only half paying attention. They're doing the ironing, or they're doing the washing, or they're having a sandwich, and they've got one eye on the BBC, which of course is desperately intellectually corrupt. So, but that's where they're getting it from. It permeates through everything we do. So, for example, 80% of the people in this country believe that Putin woke up one morning with a sore head, he drank too much vodka, was bored stiff, and invaded the Ukraine for a lark. That's 80% of the population imagine that to be the case. No idea of the build-up of change, the CIA infiltration of the government, the overthrow of the government in 2014. They don't know anything about that. They don't know about the persecution of ethnic Russians in the Eastern Donbass. They don't know Putin's bad, all right? Ukrainians are lovely. Emotion, simplistic, and no dissent.
What do you think it will take to wake up that 80%? And do you think that when they do wake up, there will be a day of reckoning for these globalists? Or do you think with the advent of AI technology and the fact that our institutions are effectively captured, that it would take something else, perhaps something like a mass non-compliance, to become ungovernable for us to break their hold on us? What do you think, Godfrey?
The problem we have is nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy, and there are still plenty of full tummies around.
Right.
I think this is one of the problems that we have. People are living lives of perhaps quiet desperation, trying to look after their family, trying to put food on the table, trying to pay the mortgage. And I think things have got to get a lot worse before they get better. When you've got the great, when you had the great sort of disobedience campaign by Gandhi in the Indian subcontinent, most of the population really didn't have anything to lose. They didn't have that much to lose. But now people say, no, it's terrible. I hate them all. There's nobody to vote for. But they just hope it's not coming up Lime Grove. I heard one chum of mine who said, yes, it's terrible, and it's terrible and terrible. Mass immigration, inflation, so on. But he said, I don't know. He said, but we've got to an age now, if it's not coming up Lime Grove, we're not taking much interest. And I think that's probably the middle class way. Plus the fact, this is a personal thing. I'm interested in your opinion on this, Jim. I believe the English middle class to be fundamentally stupid. I think they're the most stupid genre possibly on the planet. And if you don't believe me, anybody, go to Tate Modern and wig a few conversations as they praise a dog turd on a sheet, thinking it's art. There is nothing you can't tell them. There's nothing they won't believe. And if it's on the BBC or it's in the Daily Telegraph, it's holy grail. It's holy grail. And as Nigel Farage said, I always love this, has made a wonderful statement, Nigel. Very quotable in my view. Never underestimate the stupidity of the rural conservative. I live amongst them. They are my friends. Why are they thick? Charming, but thick. And I'm afraid that's the state. How can we change anything when people don't even? Some of these people, wouldn't hop about if their trousers are on fire. When are they going to wake up? Only 20% of us, you and I suspect all your subscribers and my subscribers are of the 20%. Let's do something. What can we do?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm an avid fan of history, and I remember one of the most difficult choices I had to make was to choose whether I chose geography or history when I was in secondary school, and I loved them both, and I had to choose one, and I ended up going for one for geography actually, which I did very well, and I came top of my class, but I had been in history as well. But history is important, and we can learn a lot from history because history tends to repeat itself if we're not very careful. And that's why I think that when you look at things like the American Revolution that took place against British colonial rule, the interesting thing was that I think only a very, very small proportion, maybe 3 or 5% of Americans actually fought against the British. The rest were just sort of like sheep standing on the hillside looking on at what was going on. And that lends hope to the fact that we can change things. And I'm not talking about a violent revolution or anything of that nature. I'm peace-loving as you are, although you're also a former military man as well. But it's also heartening to speak to somebody who is a military man, to know that you would always advocate peace rather than war. And I think that's where we've seen our British government pushing once again on the Ukraine war front, pushing it, even talking to the point of where they're talking about conscription. That's how close I think we might be to seeing something happening there. But I think that what you're saying is absolutely right. But it doesn't take the entire 80, 90 or 100% of the population to get on board. If enough of us do, we will take the rest of those people with us. The question is, what do we do? And I think that's why what I'm trying to get across to people is in Freedom Tree International, you've got to be out of debt. You've got to be out of debt. That's one of the most important things you can be. Get rid of your debts. And it's easier to, people say, well, I could never get out of debt. Yeah, you can actually. And we've got plans in place that can help people to do that. But the crunch comes where, as you quite correctly said, they've still got full tummies. And I'm reminded of an interesting article. I don't know if you remember this. It was in front of the Times. It caught me completely by surprise, I have to say, because I didn't expect MI5 to come out with this at the time. And it was about 25 years ago thereabouts. And I was in London. I was there. There it was in front of the Time front page, and it said something like, and I'm slightly paraphrasing, but it was something like Britain 7 meals away from civil disorder or something along those lines. And what they were really saying was, if the ordinary average British person goes 7 consecutive meals without eating, and they miss those 7 consecutive meals, something changes in their brain chemistry. Their psychology changes, and they become a very different person. They look at other people in a very different way. And I wonder, when we see the likes of Bill Gates and the globalists trying to take control of the food, if it's a form of control, and what would happen if that 80% of the population suddenly wakes up one day and they realize what's been done to them, and how that would then transpire. But that was certainly an interesting, and that was, I say, 25 years ago. What provoked them to come out and make that kind of a statement was unusual. And I couldn't quite see why they would say what they did at the time. But perhaps they had more forward views than we realized even back then. But certainly I would agree with you, Godfrey, that there's so many people that just don't realize that it's coming. What is coming is coming. And if they don't wake up really fast, they're going to be like deer or rabbits caught in the headlights of an oncoming car. I mean, do you think people will wake up in time, or do you think they're going to end up being casualties?
It's a difficult one, Jim, and I tell you why I think it's difficult. Excuse me. We have had, since 1945, the welfare state, which I believe to be a cancer in the soul of the nation. Now, what was Beveridge's idea in 1943 was to put a safety net under people who had fallen on hard times through no fault of their own, and to make sure that society looked after them. It was unnecessary because the friendly societies already did that. And of course, your nation, Scotland, led the field in that way, with Scottish Widows, Scottish Providence, Scottish Amicable, all those Scottish mutual societies. We had plenty of our own down here. So that was already happening. Lloyd George had already said that there will be a pension, out of, but it was all based on paying in a stamp. Now, actually, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that we have a system since 1945, and of course, it really came in thumped in about 1952, when everything was blown out of the window. Stamps, we still call them stamps, but they're not stamps. There was no fund. There is no welfare fund. Is come one all, come one, come all. It's a lifestyle choice. The state will look after you from cradle to grave. And we have a generation now that's grown up who think the state will look after them come what may, regardless of circumstance. We have an educational system which steams out critical thinking or risk analysis. There is no critical thinking or risk analysis in our society unless you happen to be in the field. I finished my career as the chief executive of a life insurance company because I was managing funds, and that's a whole nother story. But of course, that's all about risk analysis. So 3 years ago, when they were bringing in this scamdemic, I just looked at the numbers and said, this is absolute nonsense. This is not as bad as the 1968 flu, which I lived through. If you look at the actual numbers, the 1968, it's nowhere near the 1918 situation, nowhere even close. So there was no pandemic in point of fact. Now we have, of course, excess deaths, which is right in my field of life insurance. That is right in my field. And if we saw excess deaths in something, Jim, to the tune of 1 or 1.5% when I was running a life insurance company, that would be significant. 1 or 1.5% is significant. We're now dealing with 15 and 16%. Cardiac problems in young men, youngish men, 30, 40. Unprecedented stillbirths from pregnant women. And the list goes on and on and on. And still no inquiry. And only about 3 or 4 MPs in the entire chamber of the 650 are even prepared to concede that it ought to be an investigation. Verboten. Dissent is not allowed.
I'm glad you brought it up because it's as you know, it's a subject I have a great interest in particular the corruption that's been going on behind the scenes, and maybe not even so much behind the scenes. It's kind of done openly once again, they seem to have no conscience. They seem to have no problem fleecing everybody, telling me it's something safe and effective while they chuck £500 million into, like Richie Sunak, the British PM, did with Moderna, and then giving them £1 million of taxpayers' money to set up further business interests, knowing he was enriching himself using his position as Prime Minister. So there's something very deeply wrong with those people. Once again, all young global leaders with the World Economic Forum. So there's a similar pattern taking place. As a professional in the insurance industry, though, yes, I'm not surprised you picked up on that. And indeed, the death payouts is, I mean, I did an article a few months ago now, probably about 5-6 months ago, which really went big, and it was giving statistical data about these insurance firms and how they were noticing this was going off the charts. And I said at the time, anybody that's got any kind of investments in those insurance firms might want to rethink, because they're losing money big time. But the deeply worrying thing is the human cost. And I think whilst there's a financial cost to all of this, it's the human cost. And I have a lot of professional scientists, professors, doctors that come on the channel with me here, and I engage with them outside this as well. And I've been left with no other interpretation, if you want to think about it that way, that there is a global depopulation agenda taking place. But let me ask you, I mean, if you care to answer, do you think, I mean, I know that that's a hard thing to say. There might be people that are watching this say they wouldn't possibly want to kill us all, could they? That's a bit of a conspiracy theory. Well, in my opinion, I think they are. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, I think the big driver on this is money. I think my experience in the last 20 years has been there's always been a drive for money. How can you make money out of this kind of thing? You know, whatever it is. Bill Gates is about making money. He's mad. Yeah. And he's evil. But a lot of people just want to make the money. I think Sunak isn't necessarily mad or evil. I think he just thinks another couple of 100 million would be nice. So he's that kind of guy. So you get a sort of a mixed bag. And then you get people who I think are slightly short of something up here, like the king, who actually believes, you know, when he speaks into the camera and says, we need a sort of military thing that we've got to do. And but what he's actually saying is there's too many of you. Not too many of him. No. Not too many of his family. There aren't too many members of the Windsor family, or he might argue Harry would be good to get lost. But we've got to not travel. We've got to stop breeding. We've got to stop this breathing out carbon dioxide, which, because most people don't understand that's what we breathe out. You know, because nobody's had the benefit of a traditional education these days. Nobody knows that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is actually at a historical low. People don't know this because they're not being told this. And unlike you, they didn't do very well at geography, probably. So all these things which are givens to people like you and I with traditional educations. And of course, what you do, and Tony Benn got this right, you keep people ignorant and you keep people fearful, and then you present the state as their salvation. That's right. And one of the problems, I've got 3 acquaintances, I wouldn't call them friends particularly, I've got 3 acquaintances, you know, meet the dog walking every day kind of thing, hello, good morning, they're nice people, chat. 3 of them got jabbed against my advice. I said I shouldn't, it's you know, I wouldn't go down that route if I were you. If you're perfectly healthy, you know, you let your natural immune system. I mean, I got COVID, and call it what you like, COVID, flu, whatever it is. Very, very nasty too. I was laid up for 7 days. It was awful. One of the worst bouts I've had. But here I am, bouncing back with my natural immune system. 3 of mine acquaintances of that nature had suddenly got cardiac. Suddenly, within a few months, they were actually getting cardiac assistance at the local hospital. None of them joined the dots. None of them could accept that it was anything to do with AstraZeneca jabs or Pfizer jabs or whatever it was. They just simply wouldn't have that. They weren't going to let that happen. I have another neighbor who got a blood clot in her brain. She had to have the jab because she wanted to go to France and see her daughter, where her daughter lived. She had a micro thing clot in her head, which she lost use of the right-hand side of her body, which passed through in 24 hours. She knew how she got it and why she got it. But the following month, I think, she wanted to go and see her daughter again, and it happened to be upgraded. She had it again, Jim. She had it again. There are some people, she's otherwise a perfectly nice and intelligent woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some people you simply can't help, which is my message on my channels, is you must primarily help yourself. It's you and your family help first. So take your money out of the casino, get out of paper money, get out of banks. If you can get, we've got a small holding. We can grow our own food. We've got a generator. We haven't used it yet, although we've had some power cuts and others. All you can do is look after yourself and your family primarily. I wrote an article for Going Postal a little while ago. It was a good while ago now. It was about 5 years ago, I think. The New Dark Age. I hate to be too gloomy about this, but I think we're going into a new dark age when the Romans left, not just Britain, when they drew back, we went into it. It wasn't as dark culture as people try and paint it. Incidentally, as you know, as an historian yourself, but generally speaking, we will all have to fend, and I think we're going to have to arm ourselves in some form to protect ourselves. We have now thousands and thousands and thousands of young men of military age from different cultures. Sweden is now the rape capital of the Northern Hemisphere. Bournemouth has rapes now, which has gone up somewhere by 800% in the last 3 or 4 years. 800% in Bournemouth. Yeah. And so we are going to have to look after our women folk. You can't rely on the police, who are incidentally, in the main, pretty bloody useless. Let's be frank, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're not going to protect us. And if you and you're more likely to get arrested if you shoot somebody coming into your house, burgling it in the middle of the night. They'll arrest you.
There is
case of that only yesterday.
Yeah, there's clearly two-tier policing going on, Jeffrey. I think one of the things that just came to my mind as you were speaking there, I mean, I do fly to different places here and there, and of course you get the briefing and you're told if the oxygen mask falls out, you put it on your own mouth and nose first so that you don't fall unconscious, and then you help the person next to you. And just what you were saying there makes a lot of sense. There are just some people, even members of, I'd say, my own family, not immediate family, but people that I know, you can tell them, and you can send them statistical data, peer-reviewed data, but they still don't get it. Either there's something, it's not they're not intelligent. I've never quite been able to sort of quantify it or break it down, but there's something that they're missing, that you have, that I have, that other people, a lot of people that watch this channel have. We get it, we see it, we know exactly where we're going. And I think the advice you've given there about getting your own affairs in order is really, really good. Jeffrey, we're approaching the last part of this. I'm going to give you the last, as I always do, I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes to say whatever it is you want to say. The floor is yours.
Well, really, just to re-emphasize that, if I may, because most people are good, hard-working citizens who deserve a better shake. There's nobody else to vote for, and so I would suggest that that's what you do. Do whatever you can for yourself and your family. If you will, be selfish. Be selfish, because nobody else is looking out for you. The politicians, the civil servants do not have your best interests at heart. You must do it yourself. What is interesting, I'll be interested in your subscribers and whether they have a view on this, or whether you have a view. I talked about the stupidity of the English middle class a bit earlier. I tell you who aren't so stupid, and that is what you and I might have referred to as the artisan class. Now, I drink in a pub called the Wheat Sheaf in Howden. Bloody good pub, handpool beers, log fire in the winter. It's what they call a tea time pub in Yorkshire up here. So people, they start work 8, they're brickies, chippies, sparkies, cab drivers, whatever it happens to be. Round about 4 o'clock, they come off duty, as it were, and they go to Wheatsheaf, which is about a 4 till 7 session, which I love. It suits an old geezer like me too. These guys are infinitely better informed than your middle-class solicitor, your middle-class accountant, your school teacher. Heaven preserve us there. But these are more informed. My window cleaner knows more about the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic than most of my middle-class friend. And if you have a friend, Jim, I hope I don't offend you with this, if you have a friend who went to Oxford, he's almost triply stupid. I don't know what they do with Oxford. I think they have to have a lobotomy going to Oxford. You know, have to be the brain extracted because they're so stupid, because they fill the cabinet and they fill the civil service. The Sir Humphrey Bumphreys of this world. Ghastly people as well. Never mind. But anyway, so I'll leave you with that. Look after number one. You are number one. Nobody else is looking out for you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on with me, Jeffrey. You call it like it is. I love the common sense and I love the practical approach that you take. I just wish there was more people like you around. But you know something, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you back on. Thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your knowledge and experience and time, Jeffrey. It's been really great to have you on with me again.
A pleasure to be on, Jim. Thank you.
Well, to all the people who are watching this, I'll tell you what, you don't get better advice than that. Put yourself first, get your families ready. We don't know what's coming, but what we do know is it's probably not good. Before you can help other people, you've got to be in a position to help yourselves. If you don't know what to do, how can you help anybody? So get learning, get researching, wake up, and get yourself prepared as quickly as you can. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, Jeffrey. This is Jim Ferguson. We'll speak soon. Bye-bye for now.